Two great Americans from the world of sports have passed from our midst in recent days, and I think it's only good and proper that we should honor them both here tonight. Bill Russell, the great Boston Celtics center of the 50s and 60s, a man who is inarguably the greatest defensive player in NBA history, and who also holds a strong claim to the title of best individual player in the history of team sports, died on Sunday at the age of 88, and today's headlines brought the news that Vin Scully, the one and only thing I will ever love about the Dodgers, the greatest baseball play-by-play man who will ever draw breath on this planet, passed away yesterday at his home in Los Angeles, age 94. Now, why did I make that claim about Bill Russell being the all-time best player in team sports? Well, even though he's never averaged 20 points in a game in his entire career, why should he be rated ahead of a Michael Jordan or a Wayne Gretzky or a Babe Ruth? Well, that's an easy answer, because if we are using championships as our yardstick of success, nobody can even come close to matching Bill Russell's record of achievement. The man played 14 years and won 11 titles, including, most remarkably of all, in his first year and his last year. And how did the Boston fans repay him? Well, by hating his guts the entire time he played there. You likely don't need me to tell you that Boston has some pretty exceedingly strange relationships with its sports heroes, and I am not going to take the normal lazy reductive route and chalk up the whole thing to Boston fans being racist like most other commentators do, because if Boston fans were intrinsically racist, would David Ortiz be the most beloved Red Sox player of this century? And the idea that Boston fans take it easier on white players than black players? Well, if Ted Williams were here right now, he would laugh at you for suggesting such a thing, and then he would punch you right in the goddamn face. Ted Williams, Hoover High School, San Diego, California, was the greatest hitter who ever picked up a bat. He's far and away the greatest player in Red Sox history. But his relations with the Boston fans and media, they were just as acrimonious as Bill Russell's were. One day during his second season in the big leagues, he got pissed off about something that some heckler said in the stands, and for the remaining 18 years of his career, he never tipped his cap to the home crowd ever again, not even once, never acknowledged their existence, not even when he hit a home run in the final at-bat of his career, during a game in which only 6,000 fans showed up to see him play for the last time. With the sports writers, he tended to vacillate between grudging tolerance and open, seething contempt, with the latter occurring rather more often than the former. And Bill Russell's relationship with the Boston media was pretty much exactly the same. They considered Williams to be a surly, spoiled white superstar, and they considered Russell to be a surly, spoiled black superstar. It's difficult to detect any sort of racial double standard there. The fans, they pretty much adopted the same attitude that they saw in the newspapers, because in those days, the newspapers were basically your only source of information about sports. But, of course, it would be dishonest by omission if we failed to point out that Russell most certainly did have to deal with a really incredibly vile racial abuse throughout his career, and Williams did not. So, as much as there is commonality, there is also plenty of divergence. Can you imagine vandalizing a guy's house and taking a shit on his bed when he just won your team its 10th title in 12 years? Because Boston fans actually did that. There was a certain portion of that fan base that regarded their best player as rude, entitled, unaccommodating, and unworthy of their adulation, no matter how many titles he won. And no matter how much you want me to make an Amber Heard joke right now, I am absolutely not going to do it. Vin Scully, meanwhile, he might have been the last man in the United States of America who is unconditionally loved by everyone who ever met him or heard his voice. Even despite being a Dodger, which is the deepest moral evil in the entire cosmos, but I jest, though not really, because fuck the Dodgers. But me? I am fortunate to have a childhood full of Vin Scully memories, even though I'm from San Diego and not the god-awful, accursed hellhole known as Los Angeles. San Diego TV was kind of weird back in the 70s and 80s. And yes, do feel free to make Anchorman jokes about whale vaginas in the chat and the comments, because I know you want to, so just go ahead. But most of the channels on our dial back then were LA channels. We could watch every Dodgers game on KTDV Channel 11. We could watch every Angels game on KTLA Channel 5. But we only got to watch selected road games for the Padres, the team we support that actually plays in our city, And on the radio, meanwhile, the Padres were on 760 AM and the Dodgers were on 790. And all the Dodgers games were simulcast. So you got Vin Scully, whether you were watching on TV or listening on the radio. So if you were a kid who was supposed to be in bed asleep, but you had a pennant race to keep up with, it was a simple matter of just turning the knob a little bit from 760 to 790 or vice versa, keep up with both games. If our game was less exciting or they were in between games or innings or whatever, though, there were many nights of my young life that were spent tuning the radio back and forth between Jerry Coleman and Vin Scully. And God, I still miss Jerry Coleman. Hard to believe he's been gone 8 years already. And I should take a moment here to say that Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Francis Coleman, U.S. Marine Corps MVP of the 19 World Series, the only Major League ball player to be a combat pilot in 2 wars, was an American hero and a national treasure. During the last few years of Jerry's life, when he was only calling a few innings per home game, on days we were hosting the Dodgers, then either him or Vin would always go into the other booth and they would do a little 5 or 10 minute chat together during the pregame and just, I don't know how else to say it, but that 2 finer, more decent human beings have never sat in one room together. It was a privilege to listen to each and every time they did it. And it's nice to imagine that there is some other better plane of existence where the 2 of them have just renewed their acquaintance and are sitting in a cosmic broadcast booth somewhere, swapping stories right now. Jimmy, go get me out of here before I cry. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we wear white at home, gray on the road, and there is no goddamn designated hitter. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. Leading off the top of the first is your eponymous host and humble servant, number 41. Come on, you know what his name is. And I think I might be in a sporting state of mind tonight, so I want to revisit a topic that we haven't discussed since, I believe it was episode number 175, so 85 episodes ago, something like that. And feel free not to quote me on that arithmetic. I only do math for a living. If I remember correctly, the title of the episode was Cleveland Indians Scalped by Wokesterism, which I have to say is a pretty fucking cool title. If I could think of a title that cool every night, I would already have a real castle and not just a spare bedroom that I ironically refer to as a castle. So I saw an article yesterday by Werner Todd Houston, Breitbart News, link in description, about how much trouble the former Cleveland Indians are having selling tickets this year. And no, I cannot say Cleveland Guardians with a straight face, just like I can't say Washington Commanders with a straight face. Now seriously, if I hopped into my time-traveling DeLorean, I went back 10 years ago, and kidnapped you and brought you back with me to the present day, it's your kids, Marty! Something's got to be done about your kids! And the first thing I told you was, the Cleveland Indians and the Washington Redskins are now the Guardians and the Commanders. Would you have believed that that was a real thing? And you better get your belly laughs in on that one, because I haven't told you yet that Joe Biden is the president. I'm kind of saving the worst news for last. So I started reading this article, and there was nothing in it that was particularly surprising. I think I predicted in the aforementioned episode number 175 that the practical effects of the Indians' name change would be that a lot of people would drop their season tickets, the merchandise sales would be pretty underwhelming, and attendance and fan support would be negatively affected. In fact, I did a bit of background research earlier today, and I did find it rather delightful that used Cleveland Indians apparel seems to be fetching better prices than brand new Cleveland Guardians gear. So there's nothing here that is particularly shocking, but I see this photograph that's in the body of the article, and this picture made me so incredibly sad. I stared at it for a good couple of minutes, and then I started going from sad to angry, because there are 3 people in this picture. It's a grandpa, a dad, and a son. The grandpa looks like he's in his 70s. The dad is probably 40-ish. The son is around 12. And it's a shot of them coming through the turnstile into the ballpark, and I don't know what the current name of the Cleveland ballpark is. Progressive Field? something like this. Who cares anyway? Corporate branded stadium names are one of the absolute worst things about sports in the 21st century. But the first impression you get from looking at this family is that they all look absolutely miserable. Which is a strange way to look when you're making a 3-male generation trip to the ballpark. That is one of the happiest events there is in life. Or at least it should be. So why do these people look so very glum and downcast? Well, I'm guessing that might have something to do with the second thing that one immediately notices about this picture. Namely, the fact that it looks like the dad and the kid are supporting a totally different team than the grandpa is. The dad and the kid, they are outfitted in snappy new Cleveland Guardians gear. My God, that is a bad-looking cap logo. Just, ugh. And the grandpa is wearing the gear of the same team that he has been supporting his entire life, right up until 2021. He's got his fairly well-worn Chief Wahoo cap on. And look, irrespective of how you feel about Chief Wahoo, there is no arguing that that is one of the greatest cap logos ever. To go from that to this dog shit they've got now, that is an act of branding suicide that is probably unprecedented in sports. He's got his Cleveland Indians windbreaker on, looks like it's about 20 years old, which he is wearing over his trusty Cleveland Indians jersey. And the poor old guy looks like he wants the earth to swallow him up. And the kid looks like, I'm so embarrassed that Grandpa wore that horrible racist hat. And the dad looks like, God, okay, 3 hours to go, let's just get through this and go home. And as if we needed any more evidence that the mind virus of woke politics lays waste to every single thing it touches. Here is exhibit number 1416-238. Because now you can't even take your dad and your kid to a frickin' ball game without the whole thing being about fucking woke politics. The grandpa, he's now considered a horrible, filthy racist just for wearing the same team apparel that he's had in his closet for however many decades now. And the kid, he has had his head pumped full of so much bullshit by his purple-haired, gender-fluid public school teachers that he thinks Grandpa wearing a Chief Wahoo cap makes him automatically some sort of filthy white supremacist. I don't want to be seen with Grandpa when he's wearing that awful racist hat. You can tell the kid and the grandpa are both absolutely mortified, and I would be willing to bet money that that's a big part of the reason why. This is an example of woke activism directly interjecting itself into familial relationships and affecting them not for the better. If the Cleveland Indians had just kept being the Cleveland Indians, that family would be having a wonderful, happy day at the ballpark. Instead, they are miserable because of woke politics. The woke politics that are supposedly, according to its proponents, making the world a better and more enlightened place. We're supposed to take it for granted that the moral condition of the American nation has been materially advanced by the erasure of the nicknames of the Cleveland Indians and the Washington Redskins. We have been told for 30 plus years now that the very existence of these nicknames was causing pain and suffering and hardship to Native Americans. So it stands to reason, does it not, that the changing of the nicknames has caused this pain and suffering to be assuaged, or at least ameliorated to some degree, but has it? Or I guess the better question is, did this supposed pain and suffering and hardship ever exist in the first place? Or was it just another empty, meaningless political hobby horse for the radical activist left? Was it just another fun cottage industry whereby white liberals could make themselves a whole shitload of money and shake their woke, virtuous tail feathers up in everybody's face while doing not a single thing to advance the condition of the poor downtrodden people about whose welfare they claim to be so very deeply concerned? If you believe what the news has been telling you since all the way back in the early 90s, offensive sports team nicknames are the absolute most pressingly important issue that Native Americans face. In fact, to the extent that white liberals talk about Native Americans at all, ever, it seems to nearly always have something to do with stupid sports team nicknames. And I think I talked in the previous video about how self-evidently absurd the activist central claim is in the first place. The claim that says all Native American-themed sports team nicknames arise out of a desire to mock or deride or belittle or disrespect American Indian peoples and cultures. Which makes not a damn bit of sense because nobody names their team after something they are mocking. If you really thought Native Americans were intrinsically inferior as a race of people, and you were trying to make fun of them and celebrate Caucasian superiority, wouldn't you call your team the Fightin' Peckerwoods or the Mighty Crackers? You certainly wouldn't name it after a group of people you view as ethnically inferior and morally deficient. And the real truth, of course, is that the character and the culture and the attributes of our Native American peoples have contributed to a degree that cannot be overstated to making the American people the greatest nation in the history of the world. You'll notice that when historians draw up lists of the greatest American military leaders, they do not only list generals who fought for the United States. Lee and Jackson and Stuart are always on those lists, and so are Geronimo, Crazy Horse, and Sequoyah. You may remember 11 years ago when Osama bin Laden died looking down the barrel of an American gun. A lot of leftists got very upset afterward over the fact that he had been given the operational code name of Geronimo, as if this evinced some sort of disrespect toward Native Americans, when the opposite thing was the actual truth. They gave him that code name because he was an extremely high-value target who was going to be very hard to kill. But you know what we never, ever, ever hear from the woke activists who claim to be the gatekeepers of all Native American sensibilities? We never hear any concrete suggestions for reforming the way in which we run the Indian reservations, which remain dens of poverty and addiction and despair. And in my whole living memory, I never remember any politician in either party making a serious proposal for fixing it. They told us the casinos were going to fix it, and the casinos have been great for the tribal elders and their immediate families. They've all got nice new houses and fancy cars and very extensive real estate portfolios. But for the average reservation Indian, his condition hasn't changed all that much since 1890 because we are still running the reservations now the same way that we did back then. Seriously, take a drive through a reservation, any reservation, not just down the couple of nice, well-manicured streets where the tribal elders live, but drive out to where the regular people live, the ones who still subsist on a monthly check from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, just like their great-great-grandparents did. And you should be appalled that any American in the third decade of the 21st century is living like that. Moreover, whenever you encounter some youngster who tries to tell you how great socialism is, you tell that kid, we've already got socialism. It's called the Indian reservations, and it is a great object lesson in why socialism is terrible. Now think about all the bloviating you have heard these last 30 years or so. Think about all the ink that has been spilled by people doing silly moral posturing over Native American sports team names. And then ask yourself, have I ever heard any of these people call attention to the real problems that are faced by American Indians? Problems we could probably solve fairly easily with just a bit of concerted effort? Of course you've never heard that, because none of these silly preening bastards actually care about the conditions on the reservation. They are so connected to their performative activism and so divorced from actual reality, they think American Indians no longer have any problem. We fixed the problems. Cleveland Guardians and Washington Commanders, baby. Mission accomplished. There it is. Let's high-five each other. And we'll leave it there for tonight. Thank you for visiting my teepee. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's powwow. And I got through the entire thing without making any Elizabeth Warren jokes, which is a pretty major upset, I think. Have a pleasant tomorrow. See you Friday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.